What if I told you there was a starter deck that could defeat almost every single opponent in the game in 3 turns? What if I told you there was a starter deck that could reach the maximum damage cap of 9,999 attack points without any modification? And what if I told you there was a starter deck that could do both of these things? Well, there is. The Patrician of Darkness starter deck is one of the 17 existing starter decks in Duels of the Roses. When you enter your name, you will be given a choice of 3 out of those 17 starter decks depending on the characters you enter as your name. And if you simply enter a capital A as your name, you will be granted the opportunity to choose this Patrician of Darkness starter deck. This starter deck comprises mostly of zombie monsters, which brings me immediately to address what is one of the more popular casual strategies ever used in Duels of the Roses: Pumpking, the King of Ghosts. Pumpking's effect is very simple. While Pumpking is face up in defense mode, every turn, your zombie monsters gain 100 attack and defense. This works for each Pumpkin you have in face-up defense mode, and while they're in face-up defense mode and not spellbound, this effect does not stop until they're moved out of defense mode or spellbound. This way, if you set up any number of Pumpkins in face-up defense mode, you can reach the maximum attack value of 9,999. While this isn't the only way to achieve 9,999 attack, it is perhaps one of the most simple and convenient ways to do so. Pumpkin can be brought out very simply by fusing any plant with any zombie, provided one of the 2 monsters has at least 1,000 attack. The starter deck already comes with 2 plants, as well as plenty of zombies, and if you really want, you can gain more copies of your own monsters in the graveyard slots if you go to the custom duel and duel Deckmaster K, and you can do this from the very start of the game before you've even dueled anyone in the campaign. You can even gain multiple copies of Pumpking himself if you wish to bring him out easier. But Pumpking himself isn't the only useful fusion in the zombie deck. Zombies have a plethora of fusions that allow you to bring out reasonably strong monsters for a very low summoning cost. By fusing any zombie with a 3 SP Mammoth Graveyard, you can bring out the Great Mammoth of Goldfine, a zombie monster with an attack power of 2200. Which is actually the highest attack zombie in the game. While you can compare this monster to other monsters around the same attack, please note that fusing a monster allows you to bring it out by paying less summoning power. Because you always regenerate 3 summoning power, you are always able to play Great Mammoth of Goldfine every single turn, provided you have Mammoth Graveyard in their hand with any low SP zombie. This contrasts other strong cards such as Dark Magician, which can't actually ever be brought out on the first turn. To name some other fusions, we have Dragon Zombie, a 1600 attack zombie which is created by fusing any zombie with any dragon. We have Armored Zombie, a 1500 attack zombie, which requires a zombie and a warrior, as long as one of the components has at least 1200 attack. Wood Remains, which is a result of a zombie and plant that does not meet the Pumpking threshold. This is a zombie with 1000 attack that boosts itself by 500, which raises its attack to 1500. And we also have various others. Zombie Warrior is the result of a warrior and a zombie that does not meet the threshold for Armored Zombie, and Magical Ghost is created by fusing a zombie with a spellcaster. While these monsters are weaker, they can be used to climb up to a higher attack fusion, such as Armored Zombie or Pumpking, the King of Ghosts. Skelgon is another example of a good fusion. It requires you to fuse any zombie with a Dragon Zombie. So if you already have Dragon Zombie on the field, you just simply need any playable zombie in your hand to play over it to fuse into a Skelgon. The important thing about a majority of these zombie fusions is that they have an attack power of 1500 or higher. While this doesn't really seem like a lot, the important thing about zombies in general is that they are strong on both Yami and Wasteland terrain. Terrain advantage in Duels of the Roses boosts monsters by 500 attack and defense, and also allows them to move 2 tiles while they are face up on the field. So if you consider an Armored Zombie on Yami or Wasteland, even without any other boosts, It has 2000 attack, meaning that it can kill an opponent in 2 direct attacks. Because only very few specific cards in the game can actually one-shot an opponent, the next best thing we can ask for is beating an opponent by attacking them directly across 2 attacks, dealing 2000 attack or higher across both attacks on average. And considering most of the maps in the campaign have either Yami and or Wasteland present on the field, zombies are able to have a very high impact across a majority of the duelists in the campaign. By being able to bring up monsters consistently that can achieve 2-hit kills, and also have a movement boost so that we can successfully attack the opponents if they move 1 tile away, and also, in general, manipulate the AI, once we're in a position to attack the opponent with one of these powerful fusions, the game usually is already decided in our favor. Now before we talk about exactly how we can defeat most opponents in just 3 turns with a starting deck, I do want to mention a few things. While there are other types of monsters in the game that are strong on 2 terrains, such as Beast Warriors being strong on Meadow and Forest, they are not as good as zombies for the purpose we are discussing. Meadow and Forest are not actually as present on fields on impactful areas as Yami and Wasteland. With the exception of a duel such as Weevil and Richard, there aren't really any maps where having monsters strong on those terrains are any better than having monsters strong on Yami and Wasteland. While there is Meadow present on fields such as a Stonehenge, they're not placed in areas where we can maximize the impact of these monsters. By having movement boost available on even the first turn, we can send cards towards the opponent in a manner that could be used to force them to behave how we want. Let's use Joey as an example. If we send a monster up the Wasteland terrain, once it reaches to the left side of his deck leader, he actually moves forward. This is due to the natural pathfinding of the Red Rose AI wanting to move to the left. Because he can't move to the left to evade this monster, he tries to get around the monster by moving forward, rather than moving to the right. This allows you to close the gap to the enemy, to set up for a 3-turn kill where we attack them twice. Now, while we could send something up the forest lane on this duel, instead of moving forward, Joey actually moves away to the left, like all Red Rose duelists do if you have a monster to their right side. At this point, Joey is now actually on Wasteland, and funny enough, you now are better off playing monsters that are strong on Yami and or Wasteland anyways. Another really important duel to talk about is the Chakra Deck Leader variant of the final boss, Monad and Fabuleux. This duel has Yami in the center of the field, which allows us to set up a kill for him in 3 turns. This setup is achieved simply by moving our deck leader forward, flipping our highest attack Yami card possible on the first turn, and moving it 2 tiles forward. If he can't beat it, he plays out of the way, after staying stationary, letting us get a direct attack on the second turn, and then possibly again on turn 3 if he can't retaliate successfully. Unless we open with a strong monster that moves 2 tiles on our first turn, this setup simply is not possible. And while it is true that you could achieve this with Fiends and Spellcasters, in theory, zombies are strong also on Wasteland, which covers a range of other duels such as Rex and Keith, who have literally only Wasteland and Labyrinth tiles, and also gives us benefits on other maps that have Wasteland and areas of impact such as the previously mentioned Joey, and other duels such as Shardy, Tristan, and Necromancer, just to name a few. So now, we talked about how we can beat the final boss in 3 turns, but for a lot of duelists in the game, that simply isn't achievable without one particular card in the game, and that card is Dimensionhole. Patrician of Darkness is the only starter deck in the game that contains a copy of Dimensionhole, and while it is true that you can enter in a password for Dimensionhole at the start of the game to gain a bonus copy of it, the Patrician of Darkness deck already having one right out of the box allows us to have 2 copies of the card, increasing the odds of opening with Dimensionhole from 12.5% to about 23.7%. For a lot of duels, Dimensionhole is a requirement to win in 3 turns. And for other duels where it's not a requirement, it still provides an advantage and makes us extremely likely to defeat them in a short amount of time. So, what exactly is Dimensionhole? Well, Dimensionhole is a spell card that simply teleports our deck leader onto the space that Dimensionhole is activated. This seems simple enough, right? Well, if we use it optimally, we can close the gap from our starting position to our opponent within the opening 2 turns and immediately play a card on the second turn and attack them. So while speedruns might not be everyone's cup of red medicine, they can provide a good insight into how actually insanely broken and overpowered this card can be in the single player campaign. Normally, we are only allowed to move our deck leader once per turn and play 1 card per turn and move each of our cards on the field once per turn. So without Dimensionhole, it would take us several turns to reach the opponent. But if we were to move 1 tile, play Dimensionhole ahead of us, perhaps even diagonally, move it forward and pass, we can flip it up moving 1 tile forward on our second turn, and then move our deck leader forward again on our second turn after we've activated it, which effectively moves our deck leader 6 whole tiles across the first 2 turns, rather than the usual 2 we would be able to move without any assistance from this card. And considering the map is a 7x7 grid, this is a lot. This is like literally the entire map moved across 2 turns, and then on our second turn we can still play a card and just attack the opponent directly, just like that. So, now that we've talked about zombies being strong and very useful in a lot of fields, and we've talked about Dimensionhole allowing us to just instantly teleport to the enemy before they can even really react in a meaningful way, let's use some examples of how we can defeat some opponents in 3 turns. We'll start with a really basic example of Rex. If we open with Dimensionhole, we can simply play it on the top right tile from the start and move it forward. He will then play a card to his top right. Then on our second turn, we can flip up our Dimensionhole and move it forward, activating a tile up from where it was. Then we can move our deck leader forward again. Now we're already in a position to attack him directly, provided we have something strong on Wasteland. Then on turn 3, we're in a really good position to follow up and destroy him. If there's anything blocking us, we can just play another card over it, attack him directly the second time, and the duel is just over. Keith is incredibly similar. Notice in both of these duels we're actually blocked from moving directly forward to our opponent due to the labyrinth blocks being an obstacle on the field, so being able to play the Dimensionhole diagonally really helps us out a lot. The concept on this duel is also very similar. Each implementation and activation of Dimensionhole is playing it in the most optimal spot possible based on what the opponent plays, how they normally play, so long as it's still closing the gap. In this example, we play at top left, because that forces him to play a monster to the right. If we play Dimensionhole top right, he would play a monster in front of him, which could cause some problems. Now for an example you guys would really appreciate, I'm sure. It's actually possible to beat Pegasus in 3 turns with this starter deck, but our draw for it is quite specific, and it's also not possible if he opens with a trap card. We would need to draw Dimensionhole, Sagi the Dark Clown, and then also have an 1800 attack, direct attack prepared on the 3rd turn in order to finish him off after 2 successive attacks from Sagi the Dark Clown. By playing Dimensionhole to get around the terrain and then playing Sagi on the 2nd turn and attacking him from his right side, he will move forward, and then we can attack him again a 2nd time with Sagi on the 3rd turn, and as long as we can create 1800 attack out of our hand and attack him a 3rd time, we can beat him in 3 turns. For this 1800 attack, you would need to have a Pumpking or a Great Mammoth equipped with Violet Crystal. If I were to really mention how broken Dimensionhole is, you can actually 2-turn this guy if you're able to create 4000 attack on toon terrain, which is actually possible if, for example, you just put 2 power-ups on a toon summon skull. You could kill this guy in 2 turns, and, you know, without Dimensionhole, that's just not possible with any card unless you're using, like, cheats with Ryoku or whatever. It's just not possible unless you have Dimensionhole. That's how overpowered this card is. You should not be able to kill this guy in 2 turns, but you can. You literally can just one-shot this guy in the second turn after you spend the first 2 turns teleporting to him with Dimensionhole. It's just absolutely insane how broken this card is. Now, before I talked a lot about how strong our deck is on Wasteland and Yami, so you might assume that other decks are better suited for fields that do not have Wasteland or Yami. So let's talk about a couple examples of duels that don't primarily feature these terrain tiles. Weevil is a very good example. Not only can we defeat him in 3 turns, similar to previous duelists by launching at them with Dimensionhole, then just attacking them on turn 2 and turn 3, but in this duel, as long as you can create a monster that is boosted by Forest and has an attack total of 2000 or higher, you can launch it at him and defeat him in 3 turns, even without Dimensionhole. Of course, this deck isn't as consistent at doing this as, for example, the King Tiger Wanghu starter deck is, but it's still capable of doing it, and of course, this Patrician of Darkness starter deck is better at literally the entire game, and also still can be pretty consistent 3-turning with this guy by way of Dimensionhole. So yeah, honestly, very, very, very strong deck. Does a lot of things that it kind of isn't really supposed to do, but it does. So yeah. The best example though, however, would be Mai. Mai is one of the toughest duelists in the entire game. The only starter deck that can actually defeat Mai in 3 turns is the Patrician of Darkness starter deck. Of course, again, thanks to cards like Dimensionhole. This is also extremely inconsistent like the Pegasus one, but it is possible because we have Dimensionhole. This starter deck also happens to have a Skullbird that is quite powerful, and a Lesser Dragon. These are both strong on Mountain, and of course you always have strong fusions in general. As long as you can deal the 4k across 2 attacks after you Dimensionhole, you 3-turn. The Patrician of Darkness starter deck can defeat almost all opponents in the game in 3 turns, from the final boss, to Pegasus, to Mai, to Weevil, a feat which no other starter deck can do. And that is why the Patrician of Darkness starter deck is overpowered, and if you really want to know more about how to defeat the opponents in Duels of the Roses within a few turns, I've already made a bunch of videos on those, so you can check them out if you're looking for something to watch. And if you want to be notified about the next video, which is going to be about how to make any starter deck overpowered at the start of the game, well, feel free to subscribe so you can get notified about that one.